Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel. I'm in the School of Public Health at UC Berkeley. I'm a master's student, and today I'm going to be talking about some work that I did with Pivot. Some of you might know Pivot as Waste Enterprises. Pivot is a startup company that uses human waste to create solid fuel to sell to industrial customers such as cement companies. So today I'm going to talk about some research that we did in Mombasa, Kenya, where Pivot had plans to build their first waste-to-fuel plant. Mombasa has a population of about 900,000. 2% are connected to sewers only, 37% use septic tanks, and the vast majority, 60%, relies on pit latrines. Most of these pit latrines are in the slum communities, and when they get full, people rely on manual pit latrine emptiers to excavate them, and the sludge gets buried within the communities or dumped in a local river or stream. We estimated that about 490 tons of sludge is generated in these communities. So for Pivot, sourcing that sludge is critical to meeting their fuel production quota, as well as achieving their mission to decrease the impact of environmental hazards and public health hazards that dumping in the community causes. So in order to source the sludge from the communities and get people to dump it at the wastewater treatment plant where Pivot had the waste-to-fuel plant being built, we formed direct partnerships with pit latrine emptiers. And the goal of the initial trial here was to figure out how to incentivize them to move that sludge that was being dumped in the community to the wastewater treatment plant where we could use it to make fuel. And the first round of this trial was more of a qualitative study to really understand pit emptying processes and the economic drivers of the process. So we designed an incentive trial in which Pivot provided PPE, barrels, transportation, and training in exchange for emptiers, bringing the sludge to a designated focal point in the community. We worked with two groups of emptiers. One of the groups we invited to participate in this trial, and the other group served as a control. We developed a tracking tool in order to assess the different logistics that were going on during pit emptying. It was a mobile web app, and we called it GeoLatrine, and we used it to understand what sort of activities were going on during pit emptying and how we could cut costs and streamline processes during the whole pit emptying event. We also conducted surveys with pit emptiers and households in order to understand what they were paying for these services and how we could improve them. Another goal of this initial trial was to build relationships in the exhauster truck sector in Mombasa. We tried different trucks with different loading capacities because the trucks wanted to charge us on a per empty basis. The first two companies failed because they were really old trucks and they couldn't handle the weight of the sludge. We had two remaining options, and they were very similar in loading capacity, and the slightly larger truck was way more expensive, so we went with this company too in order to provide the transportation for this initial trial. And we didn't have the time to actually build this transfer station, and we didn't have the time or resources to build this transfer station, but we estimated the cost of building a 15,000 liter transfer station and using a honeysucker to exhaust it. And we think that this would have been the most cost-effective way to source the sludge. But even at this rate, the expected fuel revenues would not cover the transportation costs. So we wanted to figure out a way how we could increase our partners' revenues or decrease their costs so that they could pay for the transportation services on their own. What we found was that during the incentive trial, the treatment group, which was dumping the waste at the wastewater treatment plant and using PPE, were able to charge households a higher rate for their services. We also saw that households in the treatment group who had emptiers that were dumping at the wastewater treatment plant instead of within the community were more satisfied with the safety and hygiene of the service than the usual service that they had been receiving. Of the total revenue that households were giving to pit emptiers for their services, pit emptiers reported an average of 37% being spent on chemicals. Chemicals such as motor oil and paraffin in order to cut the smell during the process. They also reported that an average of 38% of their total revenues was being spent on drugs such as cocaine, cannabis, and alcohol in order to deal with the psychological trauma jumping to a pit full of shit. An unexpected cost that we discovered was 25% of the revenues were being spent on bribes. In Mombasa, pit latrine emptying is illegal. If you want to empty your pit, you have to pay the community elder a bribe in order for them not to report you to the public health department, who could have you arrested. Here we see a man chest deep in sludge and smoking a cigarette on the job, so you can understand why they wanted to spend a large amount of their revenues on chemicals and drugs to alleviate this sort of dread. So what could Pivot do in order to reduce these overhead costs for emptiers? Well, to reduce the amount of chemicals that they needed to use in order to protect them from the exposures and smells of the sludge, we thought that PPEs would help in this way. And then we designed a training program in order to empower the emptiers to take pride in their work and address issues of drug addiction, to address the baseline problems for drug addiction. In terms of addressing the 25% of the total revenues that were spent on bribes, it's a more tricky situation because if we were to push for policy that allowed emptiers to do their work, it would likely come in the form of a fee or a permitting program, which would also cost emptiers a lot. There may be unforeseen consequences of disrupting this traditional community power structure that we weren't really aware of. We found that the incentive programs may have helped reduce the cost of chemicals and drugs that pit emptiers had to use during their work. This is a picture from World Toilet Day where we encouraged emptiers to state why they were proud of doing the work that they did. So some of the lessons that we learned during this initial trial were that there is a potential to pay for transportation costs by increasing emptier revenues and trying to help them decrease their overhead costs. And another important takeaway from this trial was the identification of these hidden actions between the emptiers and community elders, the bribes, in other words, that we need to take into account when we're designing supply chain models. In the future, we want to look at things like household marketing, sludge pumps, and policy advocacy that will allow emptiers to do their work and be rewarded for safe practices. We tried using the rammer, but in Mombasa, since there was a higher proportion of the population that are washers, the sludge was not conducive to the rammer because it was too watery. We also want to look at other variables such as incentives for households, their willingness to pay, as well as incentives for the community elders, such that we can design cost models that incorporate, where the different players contribute an appropriate amount to ensure that sludge is transported out of the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Second presenter in this session. She is a chemical engineer, currently based on South Africa, working in sludge, water, and wastewater. She worked for the pollution research group at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Durban of South Africa, and finally working for ACON and engineering consultants. So please start.
So this project was based at the Pollution Research Group at UKZN, but the other organisations that also worked on it with us were Partners in Development, Airbank Sandic, and also Green Municipality. So it's the four of us. The project was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So what I'm going to be describing is a model that estimates the costs and the revenues of the whole FSM cycle, so all the way through from emptying, transport and sludge storage, treatment, and then hopefully evaluation of an end product that is actually worth something. And at the outset, like I say, this model is available to anyone who would like to use it. Okay, so what the model does not do is it does not come out with a value on a country scale saying this is how much it costs us as a country in terms of poor sanitation per capita. What it does do is it's sort of sitting in that bottom zone there and saying that we know that poor fecal sludge management is a problem, but there are a lot of factors that contribute to that, and they're interdependent, and it's a complex system. So which factor should we concentrate on? Where should we focus on investment? And to a small extent, the model also looks at estimating the environmental impact of poor FSM. So who would be interested in this model? Well, basically everyone, I should think. These are sort of some of the FSM stakeholders and examples of questions that they might be asking and which the model could help to try and answer. So at the top there, we've got a local government or a local sanitation service provider, and they might be saying, well, how should we structure a pit emptying program to reduce the cost as much as possible? How often should we empty pits? An investor or a funder might be saying, well, I've got limited resources, which factor should I invest in for the biggest improvement for my dollar value, if you like? And there are lots of other questions that people might ask, which the model can help to answer. So just going through, what does it actually do? So as we said, it obviously, it estimates, so it calculates the costs and the revenues all the way through that chain, but what it also does is it models the sludge quantity and the characteristics through the chain, so things like moisture content, the nutrient values, the calorific value, and most importantly, it links those two things to the overall costs. So to give a simple example, when you're emptying a pit, you might decide to add water to it because it enables you to pump it out and therefore reduce costs in that part of the chain. But that implies an additional cost later on in the chain because you've got to take all that water out again. Another example might be you might decide to empty your pits every 5 years because again that makes the emptying sort of more cost effective, but that results in an older sludge, which means that it impacts on the value of your end product. So the point I'm trying to make is what you do in one part of the chain impacts further down, and also this issue that we need to model in tandem these two things and the costs and revenues. So the scope of the model, it's an Excel spreadsheet. It can be used for any type of on-site sanitation system, so pits, septic tanks, urine diversion toilets, composting toilets, anywhere where you're removing the sludge off-site for treatment. And there are multiple options for each stage of the FSM chain. The model produces both financial outputs and non-financial outputs. So to run through, this is the structure of it. It's divided into various modules. So we start at the pit with the conditions in the pit. various options for emptying, conveyance, and then we split into 3 treatment options. So storage, pre-treatment, treatment, and then modules that deal with the composition of the end products, modules that deal with various ways of putting a value to those end products, and then, of course, the cash flows for the whole system over whatever planning life cycle you've chosen. So as I said, you've got 4 emptying options, you've got 7 choices of conveyance option, and actually you can also choose to combine up to 4 of these in a sort of conveyance chain, which is quite common in a lot of places. As I said, we looked at 3 specific treatment options. This is because of the context the model came out of. So we looked at the LADEPA process that was developed in Durban, which is to do with drying and pasteurization of sludge, producing a pellet product. We looked at straight incineration, producing ash, and then the default do-nothing option was just sending the whole to the landfill. This is what the model looks like. You navigate through it by a menu page. There are over 60 calculation worksheets in it. But you as a user thankfully only need to worry about 2 worksheets, and that is the inputs page, where you put all the inputs to the model in one place and it links through. So you've got inputs for rates, for vehicle costs, conveyance, and then going down further down the page, you've got inputs for your treatment processes. There are over 2,000 inputs to this model, but before that puts you off from using it, the model comes pre-filled out with 1 or 2 data sets. So you can take the model, and if you just want a quick first estimate for your context, you can just take it and change the inputs you know are important for your case and get some first estimates out. So don't let that put you off from looking at it. And then the other sheet that you're interested in is the results sheet. So it gives results both in local currency units and also in US dollars. And there are financial and non-financials, which I can go through. I'm running out of time. Right. Sorry, I've been speaking quite quickly, it appears. So how might we actually use the model to get some answers to the questions that we looked at to start with? This is sort of the process we went through when we were running it for our case in Durban. So enter the data first of all, get some first estimates for that. But once you've got first estimates, you want to ask, well, what input factors are actually the most important ones? I'm not going to look at 2,000 inputs and try to optimize them straight off. Having established which inputs are important, we then might look at trying to change the input conditions to minimize the overall costs and come up with some revised outputs. I'd like to say at the outset here, any figures that I show on the following slides should not be taken as generalized figures either for Durban or anywhere else. They're based on a particular case, and I'm more showing them to show the kind of information that the model can produce rather than to say this is the figure or the value. That's my get out of jail clause there. So these were the first results for the Etikuni case. These are a few of the outputs the model can give. The one we're looking at and focus on is this cost per pit of emptying and sludge disposal. So unfortunately for us, the LADEPA process, or processing through LADEPA, was actually coming out as the most expensive option there over the other 2. Now there are some good reasons why we might want to use LADEPA over the other 2 processes. So the next question is, well, how can we try and bring both the overall costs down, but also the costs of LADEPA compared to the other 2? So we look at the input conditions and say, well, what inputs have the most impact on that number? So on the bottom of this chart, we have 25 of the input conditions to the model, and then on the y-axis, we have a normalized sensitivity index. What that sensitivity index is saying is that for a given input, how much impact does that have on the output costs of the model? And for each input, we've got treatment through one of the 3 options, so the blue LADEPA, the red combustion, and the green landfill. There are 2 things to take away from this chart. The first one is different input factors obviously have different impacts on costs, so not all inputs are equal. And then for a given input factor, it affects the 3 different treatment options in different ways, which is important later on if you're trying to make one more competitive than another. So knowing that, and knowing which inputs are important, if you like, what inputs can we actually have some control over, and how should they be changed both to minimize the overall costs, but also perhaps to make one option more competitive than another. And we looked at each of those 25 factors, and we looked at the input-output relationships. I will just show you one very quickly. So for example, that question of structuring your pit emptying cycle, we plotted that against the total cost per pit for the 3 methods. And you can see, perhaps in this case, it would be a good idea to make sure your pit emptying cycle is longer than 3 years, otherwise you're getting very expensive. And there are good reasons behind that. This chart, we plotted the frequency of emptying against the total cost per pit. And the only thing I want to say about it is you can see that the 3 methods are more competitive. One method is more competitive than another, depending which side of the chart you're in. And that's actually a relationship we found for lots of inputs, is that depending where you are, it matters which method you use. So this was quite an important part of the valuation of the end product and how significant the value of that product is compared with the cost of actually getting there to start with. And the answer is obviously it depends. But the point is, it depends on what the conditions were in the pit and the whole process as to what value you end up with at the end. So one of the quite useful things we did when valuing it as a fertilizer was saying, doing a partial budget analysis, it's called, and saying for a specific crop, for a soil, what price makes the sludge end product actually competitive with a conventional fertilizer you can buy on the market. And it's going to obviously depend on the nutrient concentration, but also the distance to market and the cost of applying that fertilizer. So this concept of sludge end products having a more dilute nutrient content than perhaps some commercially available fertilizers is important in a number of respects in relation to that. And the point here is as well that we can perhaps increase that end product value by making careful changes to the other parts of the FSM chain. There are various things that we would refine in the model and do if that work continued, and I'm happy to talk about those more further with people. But I think the important one to say is definitely there are benefits in those end products that have not yet been monetized, particularly the micronutrient and the carbon, and they would need to be before that economic model really gives the whole picture. All those outputs are freely available to everyone, so please just get in touch with me, have a chat, and they will be up on the Pollution Research Group website as well. And with that, I will leave you with acknowledgements.
Thank you very much. Any question, comment from the floor? Yes, please.
Are there any plans to expand this model so that it includes lime treatment, constructed wetlands, and other alternatives?
There's 2 parts to that answer. I think one is to say because it's done in modules, it would be very easy to expand. So basically, you would just add another sheet in the module section and come back. So it would be simple to do. Second part is the funding for that part of the project has finished, so it's yet to be decided if and when this work is expanded. And I think if it was, the user interface would probably be something to focus on as well, rather than just leaving it as an Excel sheet.
I think that would be most valuable. Land pooling is not really used a lot, but there are other simpler options that would be really valuable for competitive purposes in the planning phase.
I guess the context of putting landfill in the model was that this sort of the worst case scenario in Durban, like if they didn't have any other option, that's where it would have to go. And so anything that you could do instead of that sort of cost avoidance compared to landfill.
Thanks for a good comment. Please.
This seems like a really very useful tool. Something I wish that we had 6 months ago. How flexible is it though to like circumstances in which you haven't modelled? I mean, I saw you went through the conveyance slide very quick, so I think I saw a transfer station in there, but we're very interested in those. But obviously, there's emerging technologies, emerging types, so how flexible is it to, say, if you put in a DWAS as opposed to just a regular transfer station or something like that?
Yeah, I guess partially the same answer as the first question. If it was drastically different to one of the 7 options already in there, it would just be a case of adding an extra worksheet, but you could more or less copy and paste a lot of the calculations across because a lot of the factors would be the same. Each method of conveyance is broken down into quite a lot of detail, so to the level of saying, how long does this particular part of the process take you? How long does it take you to unload the truck, and then how long does it take you to pump out, what's the pumping rate, and then to clean the truck at the end and that. So that's the kind of level the model goes to. But I'm happy
very much. I'm going to keep the schedule, so finish a quick question for me. Thank you very much. Next. Next presenter is Teddy Gaunden. He's for Chris Barclay. He's from South Africa. Work for Etequini Municipality for Water and Sanitation Unit as a project executive. He has 27 years experience on the sector. In this sector, responsible for different projects such as urine diversion and the community abuse broker, etc. Right, so please start your presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm sure many of you are wondering why there's a switch in presenters. Well, I think I've already informed you. 3 o'clock this morning, I get a call from Chris Buckley, one of the local pubs down the road, informing me that I'm a lead author in the paper I haven't seen, so I have to get my presentation together. So, Durban is a city of contrast, much like many of the major cities in South Africa. On one hand, we have this really first world facilities and associated infrastructure. And within 5 kilometers of these facilities, we have this dense informal settlements. And within 20-kilometer radius, we have these sparsely populated rural areas. So the challenges that we faced was really providing services to both the rural communities and dense informal settlements, and at the same time ensuring that we are maintaining existing infrastructure. So our response to the provision of services for the rural communities specifically was to look at providing water and sanitation as a package of services. This allowed for cost-efficient delivery and a comprehensive health and hygiene education program really encompassed both water and sanitation. It also allowed us to look at the consideration of the level of the water supply that's compatible with the sanitation services itself, in that you didn't provide full pressure water supply, you limited the water supply to reduce your grey water. So what were the factors influencing our choice at that point in time? And this is going way back in the early 2000s when we started providing these services. So the topography in Durban, waterborne sanitation is extremely expensive and we won't be able to provide this. The cost of emptying VRPs at that point in time was very expensive, and although it was a subsidized cost, we were going around with tankers, we didn't have any of the solutions that we have now in terms of the delivery processes, etc. And with the rollout, each household at that point in time received 200 liters of water a day. That also dictated the use of dry sanitation. The water supply has now been increased to 300 liters a day. This also allowed us, and this I'm talking about the urine diversion toilet, which also allowed for safe disposal of urine waste on site. That's a bigger home and bury. There was no need to build new pits because we just used that double vault that was written on the vault, and there was no need to build and move the top structure. So this is the urine diversion toilet itself, the run for the males. And the sliding back up is the removal of the fecal matter. The education was an integral, important component of this. The rollout was important to get this new technology and for people to understand how it functions. So equally, we had this monitoring and the concern was that without the appreciation of why we were providing the toilet, the advantages would not be used correctly. So the maintenance and emptying obligation will not be separate. It's a new technology, everyone is buying a flush toilet. We just come to this new democracy and everybody was thinking, this is the new government, we're going to get flush toilet because this is what the conditions have promised. The reality is that we provide those services and we presented this to politicians, got them to agree that we have to go down this road. cycle itself, we visited each household over 5 times. And that's the emphasis on education and what they're going to be doing each time. And after the 2-year period, we had to empty the vaults, and then we went back to the post-delivery education and we different types of interventions to get the messages across the board. So some of the lessons that we've learned from the exercise itself, the centralization of the program allowed for cost saving and focus on quality. The implementation model will suit the needs of the institution and the receptive community. And there, meeting institutional needs, in South Africa, we receive a subsidy from the government for providing 3 basic services. As much as we want to say that we try to use a demand-responsive approach, the reality was a supply-driven model, and we went in without providing options. And we just said one service, and that is during diversion tolling for the rural areas because we were concerned. At some stage, whilst we indicated that the household is responsible to empty, we are concerned at some stage that we will be involved in the emptying itself. So the ongoing monitoring that was done by the independent consultants at the Human Science Research Council, and this was real-time information coming through. As they were going through the monitoring exercise, we were providing feedback, and a lot of it related to the back covers that were initially made out of concrete and we couldn't move it, and it broke, so we had to change the design of the back covers. The vent pipes allowed rain to get in, so we changed that, and the pedestals were designed by us and not kids, so we had to then have the pedestal redesigned to accommodate children. So we also had the president coming through at that point, and Devon was the first municipalities to start off with providing the free basic sanitation, and they came up they visited the site and sort of enforced, this increased the acceptance by the community due to their visit. But equally what we found had to be communities living closer to waterborne areas. These are rural areas that are close to the formal areas, were demanding high levels of service because they were building homes, they had access to water, so they were building more affluent homes and wanted a higher level of service. While those living in the deeper rural areas were more satisfied. So some of the new business models that we are looking at is, going back to some of the challenges that we've had as well in terms of what we are facing now is the inconsistencies in our policies, and that is we are providing a free basics, free emptying service for pit latrines, and I believe they also covered that in this presentation. And at the same time, we were informing communities in the rural areas, they were responsible for the emptying. So that created a bit of conflict. We now started a new process, and we are now doing diversion problems as well. And through this process, we are then looking at the new business models, and that is looking at sanitation as a business, and that again is related to the work that Dave Wilson is making in terms of black soda flies and the double process. In the informal settlements, we are looking at provision of communal inclusion blocks through these container type facilities. So in Durban, we have this rapid urbanization. We have a migration of roughly 3,000 people a month coming to the city. We have approximately 450 informal settlements, about 1 million people living in the settlements itself. So the density is very high, so we cannot provide each and every household with a toilet. So in terms of the density, this is real important to give you an idea as to what is happening in these settlements. So this is in 2008, in the same area, it took 2 years. That. So these create major challenges for us in providing these services. Equally, we have these community demand for water, and lots of these social protests, and that's because the government has made huge promises, and it's related mainly to the housing side of things, and nothing is happening. So we are having to go in and provide the services at a rapid rate. Equally, the integrated development plan for the city sets out sanitation requirements for the code. So the housing planning, together with the rapid migration, is really creating a new challenge in our housing department. And it's a moving target. It's pushing this backlog where pushing away the target there for 10 to 15 years, we're now talking about 25 to 30 years. Project strategies that the areas that are determined were allocated for in-city upgrade, because that's where we're building houses, we will invest in the infrastructure and put in the sewer pipes, and these would be then, the evolution blocks would then be connected. And each facility will service roughly 50 to 70 shacks for the front and meter radius. In providing this, we also ensure that there is a wash area, so this allowed us to then go ahead and remove all the standpipes that we put in the pollution around the rainwater pollution. So the design advantage is that these mini pollution blocks are fairly easy to install. They can be moved quite easily. The modular structures are for areas that the trucks cannot access. These are panels that we will carry across and provide the same service. But the materials that we use ensure that vandalism is minimized, and also looking at the caretakers that take care of this. Today we have installed over 1,050 of these pollution blocks. That's times 2 because we have a male and a female. We have employed over 1,030 caretakers using extended public works grants provided by the government. But obviously they have made some significant changes to the quality of life of people. Maintenance managed by the city itself. We have the caretakers that are employed on these facilities, and the community are informed of the toll-free numbers that we have should they have any problems with the facilities itself. Education, again, is an integral component of this. So this is what the settlement looks like in the forms of the evolution blocks. The caretakers are employed by ourselves, and they're employed 4 hours a day, 7 days a week, but 4 hours spread throughout the day. We provide all the consumables, like toilet paper and detergents. So some of the lessons we've learned, caretaker is an important component, important aspect to be considered. We need to have maintenance team because we consider this a council asset, so we have to maintain it. The fittings and installation fitting must be robust enough to reduce vandalism. Community education.
Concluding, please.
Yeah. Okay. Finally, should this maintenance function be institutionalized or outsourced? The recent cost-benefit analysis we have done indicated that it makes sense. We found more economical for us to outsource the maintenance category. From a reputation point of view, you've got to look at the system in its entirety with the support services. Because if you look at just plonking a container, this is what happens.
Thank you very much, Teddy. Only one quick question.
This app system, what are the charges which people are willing to pay for this usage of it?
This is a free service. They don't pay. The very diversion charge and then the community solution cost.
Thank you very much, Teddy. Right, next is the last presenter in the session of FSM service. The presenter is Mr. Anindra Reddy. He's worked for the Municipal Administration and Water Supply Department, Government of Tamil Nadu. So please start your presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. urbanized state in India. While the urbanization at the national level is about 31%, in Tamil Nadu it is 48%. We have three classifications of the urban local bodies. The bigger ones are the corporations, we have 12 of them. Then we have the municipalities, which is the intermediate level, we have 134 of them. And we have the town panchayats, which are the smallest in size and in terms of population, which are in 528 numbers. They have mixed characteristics of rural and urban. These are the values as norms for water supply and also what we are actually supplying. Where we have underground sewerage schemes, we are supposed to be supplying water at 135 LPCD, and where we don't have 110 LPCD. About 5 corporations are supplying above this norm, 3 are supplying somewhere between 70 to 109 LPCD, and 3 are below 70 LPCD. We have a lot of catching up to do. This is partly also because once in 5 years we keep reviewing the geographical boundaries of corporations, new areas get added up, so the level of supply to the core area gets slightly diluted. And as far as the status of underground sewerage schemes is concerned, we have 5 completed in corporations, 6 are going on, and in 15 municipalities we have completed the underground sewerage schemes, 7 are going on, and we have proposed 18 more, and in town panchayats 5 are under implementation and 29 are proposed. This is a rough estimation of the sewage that is generated considering the population, considering the average supply of water that we have, and that's about 1,900 million liters today. And the treatment capacity that we have created in these 20 corporations and municipalities where the underground sewage systems are up and running is about 1,128 million liters per day, whereas what gets treated is about 657 million liters because a number of houses have not got connections because they are still using their septic tanks. These are various types of sewage treatment plants that we have. We have started with waste stabilization ponds or sterilization ponds. These are one of the oldest in the state. Then we have progressed to accumulated sludge process. Then modified accumulated sludge process, moving bed bioreactor, sequential bioreactor. I think these are the same figures which I have mentioned. The 21 corporations and municipalities, the capacity that we have created, the technology, the present flow, and the percentage of flow. Some of the considerations for underground sewage schemes, the issues that we have come across, and where we find today ourselves. The construction time has been not less than 4 years in each of those cases, and in cases it has even gone to 7 or 8 years. The STP alone takes about 2 years, and we have spent about close to $2/3 of $1 billion. The average cost is about 45, and when we convert this readily into dollars, what we are doing with the treated sewage is in one corporation it is used to irrigate the old floors. In 2 municipalities, Chidambalur and Madurai, it is left to use for agriculture. And in Chennai, about 45 million liters is supplied to the industries for the industrial use. And in Nagapattinam and Thoothukudi, we are giving this to the industries for use. And in the Dindigul Corporation, the treated sewage is given to the tanneries so that they dilute their waste. The key issues that we have come across is that in our enthusiasm to come out with underground sewage schemes, we have gone to areas where the DPRs were readily available, though they may not be the right candidates to start with. Then we've not looked at the financial capacity of the ULB because the capital grant was available, and the government could have become burdensome. one good thing is that when these DPRs were being priced, the O&M sustainability was looked into, and when the projects were sanctioned, a condition was laid down that sewage treatment charges have to be collected from the households in order to make the maintenance sustainable. We also looked at long-term maintenance so that there is no disuse or dysfunctionality in the immediate context. What is noticed is that there is simultaneous digging of the entire town. Various parts of the town are dug at the same time, facing a lot of public opposition. At one point, just before the election, there was a worry that this can be the single largest reason for physical defeat. Road restoration charges, expenses were not provided to the DPR, so that after the construction is over, roads were only partially closed. I mean, the earth was used to close the ditches and left like that. There was also delay in getting clearances from line departments, like if you are crossing a national highway, you have to get permission from the national highway. If you have to cross railway lines, you have to get permission from the railway department. Then pollution control board, who has to give you consent to establish. These have taken almost like 1 year. For the first time, the department had to take up this work on such a large scale, and many things were not foreseen, which have added like 1 year just for getting these clearances. In addition, we now have judiciary taking a lot of interest in the environment. The activists on one side, what is not understood is that without a sewage treatment plant, you have a situation where the untreated sewage is just flowing on the surface. You don't have any problem with that. But when you are coming up with a sewage treatment plant, you don't want to have it there. Then you object, then you go to board, then you face a problem. That's the kind of situation we find ourselves in. So we have only 35% of the population which is covered by the completed projects or the ongoing projects. Many urban local bodies do not have the capacity. As you can see, those 528 town panchayats are very small in size, in terms of population, in terms of density, and also in terms of revenues. Existing sewage treatment plants have underutilized capacities. Maybe in the days to come, as the population grows, as we convince them about the need to take sewage connection, we may reach that capacity. About 55% of the population are still using septic tanks, and this is the scenario that we find ourselves today, which prompts us to look at alternatives between not having anything to having a full-blown conventional underground sewage scheme. We have come up with septic management guidelines. We have issued a government order at the state government level, which casts responsibility upon the local bodies, the urban local bodies, and also the residents. There are 7 parts to this. One is design and construction of septic tanks. Each municipality, town panchayat, is supposed to survey the existing latrine septic tanks and find out if they are conforming or complying to the guidelines. And if it is not, they are supposed to be issued notices to them, give them time so that they can convert them. 2, septic tank and septic transportation detail. So evaluating the existing septic tank design and then issue notice to them, then identify the insanitary latrines and convert to sanitary latrines is one part of it. Periodic and routine researching based on capacity of the septic tank. Collection system for cluster of local bodies. As I have already mentioned, we have about 20 sewage treatment plants up and running. We have identified clusters of the neighboring local bodies which do not have sewage treatment plants, and we have clubbed them where these sewage treatment plants so that we, on one hand, we address the underutilization of the sewage treatment plants. On the other hand, we provide a safe disposal opportunity for the uncovered areas. Then there are guidelines for the operators, the tanker operators. There are already tanker operators available in the market. We have not touched them. We have co-opted them into the system. Whatever they are charging, they will continue to charge. And the only expectation from them is that they shall operate in a hygienic manner. They shall have proper safety gear. They should properly train their manpower so that they do not face risk. Each septic tank, each sewage treatment tank that we have today is expected to have a decanting facility to take the sewage from the neighboring municipalities. This is an instruction given, and which involves very small investment, and we find the compliance happening now. Input quality of the sewage is also expected to be checked so that no industrial waste leaks. There is AEC for the municipal staff, residents, and the sewage transporters. Fees for desludging to be collected from the residents, and also at the septic sewage treatment plant, about 150 rupees, that's about $3–4, so that the receiving municipality doesn't need to take the responsibility of the surrounding municipalities. These are, I think, for future guidance. These are the clusters that I've talked about. We have 21 sewage treatment plants. The neighboring municipalities and villages have been clubbed with these. We have given them bylaws so that they don't just wait for bylaws to be passed. All the local bodies have passed their bylaws to adopt the sewage management. As far as the progress is concerned, this is the last slide. We have the decanting facilities provided in 4 corporations right now, and the remaining 17 will be ready by February 15th.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reddy. Any comment?
Thank you for your good presentations. I am from Nepal, Pindagram. You have mentioned that construction time is 7 years. What is the design period in India for the treatment plant? Because it's taking more than 7 years. And the construction period itself, which design period should be more there? And how you collect the sewage treatment charges? That's a linkage with the water supply, rural area, or anything else. And we have shown there some are the mechanized, some are the treated naturally. In India, and especially in Tamil Nadu, we are functioning well as a mechanized. Because I am from Nepal, I want to know the from the Tamil Nadu. And you have mentioned that some of the treatment plants are underutilized, as well as disposing the effluent untreated. But there is contradictory. What the linkage between that?
Too many questions.
Yeah,
6 months to 1 year. But what is not foreseen at that point in time is that the objections from the public with regard to the location of sewage pumping stations and sewage treatment plant. And you also not assume that the railways or the highways department or the pollution control board would take months together or years together to give you consents. You also got into litigations. Then you also got into community problems that whenever there's a festival in the street, they would not allow you to cut a road. So you face all these problems, so that that's the reason why you've gone up to 7 years. Then as far as charges are concerned, they are collected as you collect the water charges. They are collected separately. Say 50 rupees per month, which is $1 per month. That's the charge. But it's collected once in 6 months or once in a year. And as far as the underutilization is concerned, it's a misnomer, slightly it's a misnomer in the sense that the capacity is built for, say, an intermediate period or an ultimate period, for 15 years or for 13 years. You're not expected to fill that by the year you finish construction. In any case, you are actually building that for 15 or 20 years. And yes, we do have some areas which are going without sewage network. There they continue to let out their sewage into the stormwater drain, because we have constructed this UGSS only for the core city.
Thank you very much. I think you have many questions, but because of time limitation, I need to close this session. Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for all the presenters and audience to contribute to this session. Then now I'd like to switch my moderatorship.